We are at 10 o'clock. So good morning, everyone. Are we live there? Yeah? Oh, brilliant. Good morning. My name's Councillor Karen Rowland, sitting very low in my chair and welcoming everyone to the Joint Waste Disposal Board this morning, Thursday, the 19th of September. Could I just note if there are any apologies for absence, and I turn to Hannah for that. Thank you.
Yes, I have apologies from Councillor Paul Fishwick.
Thank you for that. May I ask if there are any declarations of interest from any of the members, or for that matter, any officers? There appears to be silence on that front, so I take it that there are none. Can proceed on to item 3, which are the minutes, which are printed for those of you that have print copies on pages 5 through 8. And I would like to know if there's any corrections that people would need to make, or any actions that people feel that those minutes might know. There's nothing there, so the minutes are, I don't have any additional points, so I think that those minutes are free to go ahead and sign. And I will sign those in. Item 4, urgent items of business. I don't have anything notified to me beforehand. I see nothing urgent. Okay, do believe we can go ahead and carry on. Item 5, progress report, and for that, I believe I turn over to our officers, Sarah and Monica. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So yeah, as at the last meeting, I am just going to give you a quick introduction to some of the points in the progress report that have got actions or recommendations associated with them. So I'm going to talk about the first 3, and then I'm going to hand over to Monica just to cover off the bits at the end of the report. So the first recommendation relates to the processing of plastics. So it's been our recent practice, although not policy, to process plastic bottles, pots, tubs and trays within the UK. We always try to make the most of any market conditions though, and our contractor has recently advised that we could start send plastics into Europe for processing. So this is a sort of generic request rather than something that relates to a specific opportunity that exists at the moment. But it would give us a bit more flexibility, and it also recognises that there isn't going to be sufficient capacity within the UK to process all of the UK's plastic. So all of the usual checks will still be in place through the contract. So we therefore recommend that members agree for officers to consider these options into Europe when they're presented by the contractor. It's also probably worth noting at this point that FlexCollect, who take our flexible plastic films, are also potentially going to consider trialling some off-takers in Western Europe. So that's something else just to note. Do you want me to pause here so you can discuss it, or shall I move on to the next one?
Why don't you go ahead and cover off the next items, and then we'll stop for members' comments.
Okay. So the next recommendation then is about enabling a function on the check-in app that's used at the recycling centres, so that we can flag certain visits of interest. So this is particularly relevant in relation to the commercial vehicle permits, and should help us to identify more easily abuse of the system. So our data protection notice already states that we will monitor usage, number of visits by these vehicles, and the disclaimer that these users complete when they apply for a permit for their van or pickup truck or sign-written vehicle also says that they understand that suspected misuse of permits will be investigated. So we're not planning to ask users for any additional personal data, but if members are happy to approve the use of this sort of flagging feature, it would be good for us to gather a bit of data, and we can then use that to draft up some policies in regards to how we would follow up with any findings that may be generated through that piece of work. And then the final recommendation that I'm going to cover off is a recommendation to introduce an admin fee in relation to the HWRC Trade Waste Service. So the Trade Waste Service has a restriction of 100 users on it. So this was introduced so that we could protect access for members of the public to the sites and ensure no negative implications for them. But that means that we need our traders who are using the scheme to actually use the scheme and not just take up places that could otherwise be used by others. We do have a parallel service in place for traders who just want to come to the recycling centres on a one-off occasion. So we just need sorry, I should have said that doesn't have the same restrictions in terms of numbers of users as the primary scheme. So we just need our users to use the scheme that's most applicable to their needs. And I think that an admin fee should help us to do that. So that's me done, and I'll hand over to Monica.
Why don't we go ahead and perhaps stop there, and if we could open that up for member and officer discussion. So, and if I could just remind that comments are sent through this chair. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Templeton.
Can I say I'm really quite unhappy about moving to the European off-date on 2.2. There is an environmental cost here of moving it across. It's also which country it goes to, because I know it can say, oh, well, they're the same conditions, but if anyone travels to some, it's not always exactly the same conditions as we would expect. And I mean, if it's not Europe, then it goes somewhere else. I really think this might be a move that we start moving it elsewhere. And if we can't actually cope within Britain, then we should start looking more seriously at the use of plastics within Britain and bring in something else if we can't do this. I mean, it's a long-term thing perhaps, but I am really, really not in favour of taking our stuff to Europe or anywhere else.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Purnell.
Thank you, Chair. Likewise, I have serious reservations about voting to allow our plastics to go to Europe. As Councillor Templeton said, I think it's almost a slippery slope. And it may be that we have to do something similar in the future, but at the moment, I can't justify it. With regards to the monitoring for suspected trade abuse, I was just going to ask how long the data would be kept for, because I know it's kept at the moment for 6 months. I'm wondering if people have these flags, if their data would be kept for longer.
Thank you. Do I have any other comments from members? Yes, Councillor Terry.
Thank you, Chair. Unlike my colleagues in Bracknell, I'm a bit more pragmatic about these things. Good. Clearly, we haven't talked about it. So, you know, there is a sort of thing it's about the movement, it's about the carbon, you know. So there's two things. There's about what's the increase in the carbon load, really, and secondly, it's about policy creep. So the risk is that actually this is allowed, and then before we know it, we find out that some of our plastics has ended up in China or Vietnam or wherever these places are. And I completely understand that and would have my own reservations about it. I think there's a real issue for us about availability of UK operators, and I agree that we should have more or we should use less plastics, but pragmatically, our contractor may find themselves in a tight situation where they can't take the stuff to anywhere in the UK and they don't have any wriggle room about going elsewhere. And I don't feel so uncomfortable about Europe. I presume it will go, you know, what I think is, the other alternative is to have a freight train coming out of Green Park, and we can put our plastics on that, and it can go to a ferry, it can get on a ferry, and it can get on another freight train, and we wouldn't really mind as much in terms of the carbon emissions. So I think that we need to build in something that says this isn't, you know, because I just think it's not saying we are going to move all of our plastics over to Europe. It's saying if we've got a problem where we can't access UK processing, can we use this? And actually there's some financial advantage. That's not our first thought, but it is there. But that we need to be very tight in saying we would want to know final destination, that it wasn't being moved from a European country to somewhere else. And we would want it to be currently the exception rather than the rule. But I feel more pragmatic about that. I don't have any problem about the other proposals myself either. I understand about GDPR, and we need to be sure that people are clear why we're doing it, and we need to be really tight about how we're doing it. But it does feel like that, you know, we do have to have some mechanisms to make sure that our policies are being implemented properly and people are following the rules. So that's my 2 pennies worth today.
Thank you. Do I have any other comments? And does Wokingham perhaps want to weigh in on this?
No comments at this time. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Are there any other comments? Yes, Emma G., please.
Thanks, Chair. Just a question, really. In the event that we exceed or we can't find somewhere in the UK to process, can I just ask what the implication is for what happens to that plastic? Presumably it gets burnt, which has its own carbon implication. And then secondly, what's the cost implication? What's the impact on recycling rates as well? Just a couple of questions.
Could I go back to Mr. Burt to clarify and comment? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think it is about the pragmatism of having a range of options. The contract is set up for us to have, let's for argument's sake, say 150% of the suppliers that we need at any one time, precisely so the contractor can use the market rather than be led by the market, if you like. So, to your point around what would happen if we didn't have UK reprocessors, it is precisely that. Either it would have to go to Europe, and I suspect we would probably have one of those kind of awful 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon decisions to make. We're either going to do this or we're going to send it to landfill or burn it. So we would have to send it to Europe, I think, at that point, because I suspect we wouldn't choose, again, this is your point you're making, Emma, is we probably wouldn't choose to burn it or to send it to landfill. So in a way, I suppose, really, what we're proposing here is for us to get ahead of the game, something that we foresee will happen with the raft of legislation. I know we'll talk about that later. The raft of legislation that's coming down the track, we already foresee that the UK will not have processing capacity for all the plastic that's going to be collected. And so in a way, this is us effectively carving ourselves out the scope locally, local decisions, obviously, in advance of all of that happening. But I would stress, as Sarah said in the report, this isn't because we feel there's any imminent reprocessor or option coming forward. It is purely because we want to make sure that we don't get caught in that situation. So I hope that helps.
Thank you for that. Okay, very good. Oh, sorry. Yes, Councillor Temperton. Sorry, I didn't see.
Well, I listened to everything, and I mean, if this was the last resort, if there's nowhere else to go, but I think we would need to know when, where, we need energy considerations in there, and we need to know the capacity of Europe. Because if everywhere is sending them to Europe, when do they get full? And then they say, we can't cope anymore, so now it's going to India and China. And I really think we need more details of when this is going to happen, how it's going to happen, and who's going to make the decision. You know, I mean, okay, if we're full up, we can't. I'm always optimistic that science will come in and this stuff will decay quicker. But okay, that's my dream. But we need energy considerations for this as well. And if they can tell us that it's going to be the carbon content, the emissions, can be resolved or as least as small as possible. What the capacity of Europe is, the last resort, where it's going in Europe, you know, Western Europe, where it's going, and when this would be needed, and we're kept really informed, then I would support this, but I think we need a big question mark over this, that this is the last resort, rather than saying, yeah, okay, we're going to go for this, we can shove it here, because if everywhere's sending them to Europe, then sooner or later we're going to hear that can't cope with it either.
Thank you, Councillor Temperton. I was going to propose something along those lines, because I do hear everyone, and I myself take that on board. Obviously, there are locations in Western Europe that are closer to us than some of the other parts of the UK, where something might be trucked, and I think Councillor Terry's journey there of putting it all on at Green Park and carting it all down is a reality. I'm inclined to, from what I'm hearing and understanding from people, and I would agree that transparency back to this board would be really key, and I think that that's something that we would continue to monitor, because from what I'm hearing from members is the importance of our response to the climate emergency, to reduced emissions and all of that, and that's something that's paramount, I know, for all three authorities. So I do believe that this is the intent, to use this as a fallback, and I think that that is the ethos of which obviously members are feeding back to the board, that's the kind of system that we would want, and that we would expect transparency on that. Are members satisfied with that course of action? Okay, very good. And moving on to the comments in regards to the point that Councillor Purnell made in regards to the collection of that information in order to facilitate the running of that and monitoring of those situations with the waste coming in. I again sense that there's an understanding and acceptance, and I guess what we're saying is we would want it reaffirmed, at least in the minutes, that GDPR is being followed, that information is not kept in excess or for any other means, that those means are stated out very clearly to the public in that regard. Finally, in the last item that Sarah presented, I don't sense that there's any kickback. No one commented on that, so I think that we're fine to proceed with that. And finally, Sarah, although you didn't cover it off verbally, I'd like to thank you for the extra work that was done in the review of the performance monitoring, which was very helpful and was something that was requested the last meeting. So do not think that your efforts have gone in vain. It was very much appreciated. So are we okay, members, to move on then? Okay, very good. So we'll turn it over to the second portion here with Monica. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm here just to basically cover the final recommendation that is indicated in 2.5 about the endorsement of the final reuse strategy. Members should recall that we presented the draft reuse and repair strategy in the meeting in March, which is now finalized and can be seen in Appendix 6. We do take into account a feedback received via the resident survey, which on its own received a really great response of over 3,000 residents taking part. Based on the feedback, it's been quite apparent that there's been a strong interest in donating reusable items from home. As a result of that, we would like to focus on that activity as a priority, and we brought that forward in our strategy. At the same time, it's our willingness to continue with our pop-up shops, and any other existing reuse activities as they has been handled so far. And the most recently, we are working on the pop-up shop to be held outside of the recycling center, preferably in Wokingham. And yeah, if there is no objection to the strategy, I would be keen to ask members to endorse the final strategy that's in Appendix 6, please. And maybe just shortly on the note, perhaps to help that conversation that we just had earlier on, the contractor publishing annual environmental report every year, and we just had published one recently, which is now available on a website. That document is full of key stats and information what's happened to our waste. Is a great way to show the transparency to residents, and we are often using it in communicating any information what's happened to our waste, the journey of the waste, where the material goes. That I believe that it's very important to all of us here, but also to residents. So hopefully, you know, that any information and any questions related to what's happened to our plastic as well will be is always covered there. And this year we definitely noted a really good project and as well a great performance in terms of the landfill diversion, which is beyond 95% and higher than usual 90%, over 90% customer satisfaction in the recycling center. So we will be certainly using that document going forward. If there are any questions, please, Chair, thank you.
Great, thank you, Monica. Are there any questions or comments from members? There seemingly being none. Monica, could I ask you, because we're in a public setting, and I think that it's important that we acknowledge actually the MRW National Recycling Awards that that you all have been nominated for. And if you could cover those off and just quickly explain those, I'd like to have a little bit of a crow about some of the successes.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, indeed. So free project this year, Flex Collect, our plastic bags and wrapping curbside recycling trial, our Regrow scheme, community scheme that enables to donate free compost bags, and also projects related to virtual tours of recycling facilities and the material recycling facility that has been completed this year were acknowledged by the industry. And so our free has been shortlisted for the free awards at the National Recycling Awards that will take place in November. So we are hoping to have some further success following that. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and I'm quite sure that the masses of public that are out there listening to us this morning will also appreciate that. But it is important that we acknowledge the good work. And so members having no other comments on the reuse strategy, can we go back then to the recommendations that in 2.1 to 2.5, and can we agree those, members?
Agreed.
Very good. Thank you very much. So at that point, we are now already to item 6, which is the exclusion of public and press, which I'm required to read out. That pursuant to Regulation 4 of the Local Authorities, Regulations 2012, and having regard to public interest, members of the public and press be excluded from the meeting for the consideration of item 7, which involves the likely disclosure of exempt information under the following category of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person. So with that, that closes out the